And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero, as Putin issues a nuclear threat against the West and the war in Ukraine enters a critical 24 hours. We'll bring you the very latest from MPs and our own experts and asking what it means for us here in the UK. That's after the news with Rosie. Good afternoon, it's 12 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Efforts to broker an immediate ceasefire are underway, with delegations from Ukraine and Russia meeting in Belarus. Kiev hopes the talks will lead to the withdrawal of Russian forces from the country. President Volodymyr Zelensky has asked the European Union as well to fast-track Ukraine's membership application.
We
address the European Union to admit Ukraine immediately according to the new special procedure. We are grateful to the partners that they stand with us, but our goal is to be with all Europeans, and, most importantly, to be equal. I'm sure that's fair. I'm sure we deserved it. I'm sure it is possible.
Of course, we'll keep you up to date on those developments. Now, Ukraine faced more heavy fire overnight as it now entered day 5 of the conflict, with the fighting near the city of Mariupol and blasts being heard in Kiev and Kharkiv this morning. The UK Ministry of Defence says the bulk of Russia's ground forces are said to be around 18 miles north of Ukraine's capital. Satellite images taken yesterday show a huge military convoy heading towards Kiev. The Russian news agency Interfax claims 2 towns in the southeast of the country have been captured. Now, meanwhile, the Ukrainian military has released footage which it says is a Russian missile system being destroyed by a drone strike. Ukraine says the BUK missile launcher was targeted in the city of Malin, about 60 miles northwest of the capital. Ukrainian MP Oleksiy Goncharo told GB News the country needs help protecting its airspace.
We are not looking for, for boots on our ground. We are ready to fight ourselves. And we don't ask British people, American people to fight for us. But we ask you to help us to protect the skies. Because the Russians are using aircrafts and missiles to hit residential houses, kindergartens, hospitals, schools.
There have been calls from Ukraine for foreigners with combat experience to join the fighting. But Armed Forces Minister James Heappey says British citizens should think twice about going.
War is brutal. It's not the sort of thing that you jump on a plane to go and do for the fun of it. The people that you are seeing picking up Kalashnikov rifles in Kyiv today are doing so because they face an existential threat and they are desperate, and that is inspirational. But I don't think we should be encouraging British citizens to go to Ukraine.
The Prime Minister, the UK Prime Minister, has been chairing a cabinet meeting. Britain has now joined the US and the EU in banning financial transactions with the Russian Central Bank, the Finance Ministry and the Wealth Fund. That's effectively cut Moscow off from Western financial markets. Well, the government's also fast-tracking legislation to stop dirty money being laundered through the UK's property market. Russia's central bank has more than doubled its key interest rate to an unprecedented 20%. It's trying to shore up the ruble, which has now fallen to an all-time low against the dollar after sanctions were imposed against Moscow. Now, they include the blocking of some Russian banks from the international banking system, SWIFT. Human rights groups are condemning Russia's reported use of cluster bombs on a preschool. 3 people, including a child, were killed in a nursery in eastern Ukraine near the city of Kharkiv. Another child was injured in the attack. Amnesty International says the use of cluster munitions in a civilian area may constitute a war crime. The UN says 500,000 people have fled Ukraine since the invasion started. It follows news Britain is likely to follow the EU's lead in taking Ukrainian refugees for the next 3 years. Boris Johnson has announced that immediate family members can join Ukrainians currently living in the UK. Anna Zek from the Association of Ukrainians in Great Britain says the UK should open its doors to all those fleeing conflict.
I'm actually the daughter of someone who was welcomed by Great Britain after the Second World War, who built the Ukrainian community in Coventry. Britain welcomed refugees then from war-torn Germany, where they had been slave workers, and we want the same now.
In other news now, coronavirus restrictions have been eased in Scotland. Mandatory vaccine passports for nightclubs, concerts and football matches have been scrapped. Students and teachers no longer have to wear masks in the classroom. They do still have to be worn in communal areas, and distancing rules will still apply. You're now up to date here on GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, let's head to the briefing with Gloria.
Coming up this hour on The Briefing, as Putin puts his nuclear force on high alert, we'll have the latest reaction from the government on the rapidly escalating conflict. I'll be talking with former United Nations commander and Conservative MP Colonel Bob Stewart, and our security editor will bring us the very latest news on the Ukraine. We'll hear from a UK man who wants to go and fight with Ukraine, and talking to a woman there about what more help the West can give. And our economics editor, Liam Halligan, will explain what the conflict will do to prices back home. And they're going to get even more expensive. It feels like we've entered a different world from the one we were in just a week ago. Russian President Vladimir Putin is threatening the use of nuclear weapons, even though peace talks between Russia and the Ukraine are underway. Joining us from Downing Street is Tom Harwood, our political correspondent. Tom, the Cabinet has been meeting this morning. What do we know about that meeting?
It has. We do not yet have a readout from that meeting, but it's pretty unusual for such a meeting to take place on a Monday. Normally, Cabinet is held on Tuesdays. Clearly, the government is in a state of expecting this to be an ongoing crisis-like situation. We know that there were a number of COBRA meetings over the last few days as well, chaired by the Prime Minister and other senior Cabinet Ministers. So really, when we're looking at what more the UK can do, there are a number of options. Of course, legislation is coming before the House of Commons today to deal with some of the dodgy dealings that foreign oligarchs may be having in London, trying to clear up, create a public register of that land and that property, but also in terms of unexplained wealth orders, these National Crime Agency mechanisms that are really getting beefed up today as well. So there's stuff that's happening on the domestic side in terms of sanctions, but also there are a lot of calls from voices within Ukraine that more needs to be done for military support as well.
And just on the issue of individual Brits going to fight Russian forces, Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, appeared to support that yesterday. Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, much more cautious. Just tell us what the line is from government on that.
Certainly, it's been a bit of a confusing situation because, of course, we know there have been individuals who have responded to calls from many within Ukraine, particularly former armed forces servicemen, who have said that they will go along, that they will go and fight. And the Foreign Secretary seemed to be pretty gung-ho about that yesterday. However, the Defence Secretary and indeed just Defence Minister James Heappey have been a lot more cautious about that, saying that they wouldn't encourage it, pointing to war being the nasty thing that it is. It seems like the MOD has a much more cautious tone when it comes to that issue than some other elements of government. What I'll get for you, Gloria, is a solid line, hopefully after our lobby briefing this afternoon, where we can really take the government to task over some of these confusing lines. I'll be able to come back to you later on this afternoon with if number 10 is able to get a clearer line out after that confusion.
And Tom, finally, the issue of refugees. The British government says will provide refuge to Ukrainian citizens if they have immediate family members here. Now, they are coming under criticism from the Labour Party and some Conservative MPs that that is too limited. Do we expect to get any change on that?
I think it's a pretty safe bet that there will be more to say on this issue, that the government will come forward with further routes and new rules. I think it's incredibly unlikely, however, that there'll be a complete visa waiver of the kind that the European Union has done, doing away with paperwork for 3 years for those leaving Ukraine. That's the situation in the European Union. I think it's unlikely that that will be the situation in the UK. Simple geographies and matters of scale come into play here, but certainly there is a lot of pressure for the United Kingdom to do more. I would expect the United Kingdom to make more announcements on this. They seem to hint over the weekend that there may be more on the way, and we're going to get a sort of iterative process here of inching forward on various routes. A big visa waiver, the kind that some are calling for, I think that might be too far in the eyes of this government.
Tom Howard, our political correspondent, thank you so much. Joining me now is Colonel Bob Stewart, former British Army officer and UN commander, Conservative MP for Beckenham. Good to see you. Thank you for your time. Bob Stewart, so far the invasion is not going to plan for Russia. Why not? And how can that be sustained?
Well, personally, I suspect Mr. Putin was rather thinking that it would be rather like a blitzkrieg when he went into Ukraine. But it hasn't been that. The resistance has been sustained and quite thorough. And indeed, the Ukrainians have put up a pretty good fight. And this has probably come as a shock. And then you look at the Russian soldiers who seem to be somewhat surprised, firstly, that they're in Ukraine, and secondly, what the heck they're doing there. You see the confusion on their faces often when we've seen reports of civilians confronting them saying, what are you doing in our country? They don't know. This is not good for the Russian army.
And Colonel Bob Stewart, you are a United Nations commander. You have given evidence for war crimes trials. You asked the Prime Minister in Parliament to agree with you that any Russian who kills a Ukrainian must remember that one day they may well be brought to court for crimes against humanity or genocide. How likely is that to happen?
Well, genocide probably not, but crimes against humanity possibly, because a crime against humanity is shelling a school and killing children. That is a crime against humanity, and most certainly that's happened already. So normally, if you're accused of a war crime, your country's meant to try you, but if you can't do that, the International Criminal Court will do so. And I've given evidence in 4 war crimes trials for the ICTY, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Republic of Yugoslavia. So I do actually realise what is a war crime, and war crimes are being committed.
President Zelensky says that this is a crucial 24 hours. What, in your view, are the chances that today's talks could result in peace?
Well, I don't know what the chances are, but I know what the hope is. The hope is that there will be a ceasefire imposed and that actually somehow or other there will be a withdrawal of forces. I mean, if you have a ceasefire, and I've done lots of ceasefire negotiations, both sides have got to win. Well, what would be a win for Mr. Putin may well be that the Donetsk, Donbass area, Luhansk, and the Crimea are incorporated into the Russian state. And what might be a win for the Ukrainians. Less of a win, I admit, but actually the war to stop and actually de facto agreement that the Russians will stop at the Donbass and Crimea. It's possible that could happen. Putin could claim he's got a victory. The Ukrainians can claim they've actually held off the Russians, which indeed they have, and that they've done much better than they thought. And from that, probably there'll be immediate cries to join NATO and the European Union as soon as possible. In the long run, Mr. Putin will have lost.
Very clear. Now, of course, we were all terrified yesterday listening to the news that Putin saying he has placed nuclear forces on a high alert as a response to what he said is Western aggression. It sounds absolutely terrifying. How seriously should we take his words?
Well, when the Russians do exercises, and they've done a lot of those exercises, I particularly looked at ones actually in the Baltic, there is always a nuclear aspect to their operations. The Russians look at use of tactical nuclear weapons, short range, as being something that's part of the main conventional battle. We don't. We look at this as being an escalation too far. I suspect that Mr. Putin will realize that if he uses any form of nuclear weapon, that will be a huge disadvantage to him when dealing with the rest of the world, because the rest of the world will not put up with that.
The Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, yesterday said she would absolutely support individual Brits going to fight Russian forces in Ukraine, saying people can make their own decisions. We've heard a slightly different line this morning from Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary. What's your advice to anyone who is considering this?
Well, I think people can make up their own minds if they wish to go, but I wouldn't go if I was an individual who didn't have military training. And personally, I think my advice would be don't go unless you really know what you're doing and actually are prepared to run a huge risk with your life. Because frankly, if you go there and you don't know what you're doing on a military battlefield, you're nuts.
And finally, the issue of refugees. We will provide refuge to Ukrainian citizens who have immediate family members here. We're well behind Europe on this. Should we be more generous to desperate people?
Gloria, when you say well behind, I think they agreed to that yesterday. The Cabinet's meeting has just been meeting. I suspect we'll fall much in line with what Europe's doing once actually decisions have been made. So I would expect that we would welcome Ukrainians who are fleeing their country because of this war.
Incredibly informative and interesting to talk to you, Colonel Bob Stewart. Thank you. We are going to our security editor next after the break.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss said she would support British people travelling to Ukraine to fight Putin's forces. In extraordinary comments made at the weekend, Ms Truss said the fighting in the country was a battle for democracy. Paul Hawkins is outside the Ukrainian embassy in London and has been speaking to someone who says he will volunteer. Paul.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I've been here since 7 o'clock this morning, and after Ben Wallace made that quite extraordinary announcement earlier that British nationals with combat training, if they want to go and fight in Ukraine, they should come to the Ukrainian embassy. There has been a slow trickle of mostly men coming here and asking where they go to sign up. They've been sent around the corner to the Ukrainian Cultural Centre, and the official line that I've been hearing from the embassy here is that they're waiting for the government in Ukraine to give more explicit instructions, but for now they are taking the names and numbers of people and trying to put them to good use. So a steady stream of men coming here this morning, and first up, around about 9 o'clock this morning, a guy called Anthony Zamparelli. He's 56 years old. He has been previously trained by the British Army, although he never fought for the UK, but he's willing to go and fight for Ukraine. He's willing to die for the Ukrainians, even though he's a father of 7 and his wife and his children aren't happy. Have a listen.
Well, I just think it's something I need to do.
Yeah.
A lot of people are out there suffering at the moment. I've got military experience. They need boots on the ground. That's definitely what they need. I think their fighting force is 190,000. What they're facing is unbelievable. So, I just think people that have got military experience, or even if they haven't, and they went in to fight for freedom, they should go out there.
Yeah. Are you willing to die?
Well, obviously, yeah. If I'm going to go into something,
I know, but it's just a big thing to think about when you've got family and friends.
I don't want to do it. I don't want to die, but I mean, you can't think of them sort of things when you're going into that situations. If you believe in something, you should go and do it.
Yeah, extraordinary guy, and he went off to the Ukrainian Cultural Centre around the corner. Another bloke I just spoke to just now, Jason Luck. He's someone who has served in the British Army for 12 years. He has family in Ukraine, and he was genuinely really nervous when he was here. I thought it was the cold, but he said he's just so anxious. He hasn't heard from his daughter, who's Ukrainian, in Ukraine from a previous relationship, his current wife, who he has a stepson with. She won't come over here. She wants to stay in Ukraine. So he said, well, I'm going to go and fight over there and try and put what I've learned with the British Army to good use over there. Of course, he doesn't want to go there, and she doesn't want him to fight, but he says that he just feels like he has to do something, and so he's also signing up. So really interesting, the level of support here for Ukraine from a number of British nationals.
Paul, really extraordinary. Thank you so much for bringing us that report. Now, talks got underway in Belarus today between Ukraine and Russian delegates. We can get the latest from our security editor, Mark White, about the nature of those talks. Mark.
Good afternoon. Yes, those talks are underway, as you say, Gloria. They got underway about an hour and a half or so ago. They are, as far as we know, still talking, which is good. As long as they're talking, is the potential, the prospect for maybe some kind of ceasefire to stop the fighting, if nothing else, and just to allow those who are fleeing the main battle zones to get out of harm's way and maybe across the border into some of the Baltic states. We know that hundreds of thousands have already crossed the borders into Poland and Slovakia and Romania. So you can see the table there in a venue in Gomel, which is in Belarus, just over the border between Belarus and Ukraine, that the talks are taking place. The Ukrainian delegation, which includes the Armed Forces Minister, they were helicoptered in there a little earlier today. There was a speech by the Belarusians at the start of this saying that they hope that there will be some scope for trying to bring a ceasefire here. So as I say, the talk's still underway, and it has to be hoped that they can at least come to some kind of interim arrangement for a ceasefire, if not something more substantial that brings an end to a conflict that has already resulted in hundreds of lives. In fact, if you listen to the Ukrainian military, they say that some 4,500 Russian troops have been killed. Now, we have no way of verifying it. It is a claim that has come from the Ukrainian government and its defense ministry. They say that they have taken out more than 1,000 of these armed personnel carriers, that they've taken out tanks as well, and that they're using to do that British manufactured and supplied weapon systems, US supplied weapon systems. And on top of that, of course, more weapon systems are being smuggled into Ukraine all of the time. President Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, has said he badly needs these weapon systems, ammunition. He needs as much help as he can get. He's not going to get boots on the ground, of course, from NATO countries, but as Paul Hawkins was reporting there, there is a militia on the ground of Ukrainian citizens, and President Zelensky wants other citizens, maybe former members of the military, to come out from other countries around the world. And already at the Ukrainian embassy in London, people have been in touch, former members of the military, people that want to do something, that want to get out there and help the Ukrainians.
Yesterday, we all were very, very worried when Putin says that nuclear forces are on high alert in response to what he described as Western aggression. The rhetoric is frightening. Should we be frightened?
It is frightening, and it's worrying for a reason that, of course, we are then entering a period potentially of increasing and heightened tensions. If nuclear forces are being even symbolically prepared to be on a heightened state of alert, then it does raise the prospect of missteps. These things always in the stages building up to a conflict, when you've got brinksmanship, there is always the potential for something to happen, for someone to pull the trigger and for war to break out. And of course, once war does break out, as it has down in Ukraine, it's often quite difficult to slam on the brakes, put it into reverse. These things can have a momentum of their own. And when you've got Vladimir Putin making not even veiled threats, but actually overtly saying that his nuclear posture is being enhanced, then that is of concern. As far as the Western governments are concerned, the British government, they won't go into detail about what our nuclear posture is. They never would, except to say that we have continuous at-sea deterrence. We have these Vanguard-class nuclear-powered and nuclear-armed submarines, 4 of them. There is always at least one of these nuclear submarines at sea at any given time. And of course, that's us. You're talking about the Americans and the French, of course, as well, all part of NATO and potentially willing to react if the need, God forbid, ever gets as bad as that. But the hope is that the talks that are underway in Belarus at the moment might bring about a ceasefire, and at least more level and calm heads and discussions can emerge from that.
Mark White, thank you so much. Thank you. In a moment, I'll speak with a Ukrainian woman in the country about what life is like there now and what help they need. And our economics editor will explain how the war will send prices even higher here at home. First, it is time for the news with Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's coming up to 12:30. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Now, efforts to broker an immediate ceasefire are currently underway, with delegations from Ukraine and Russia meeting in Belarus. Kiev hopes the talks will also lead to an immediate withdrawal of Russian forces from the country. The President, Volodymyr Zelensky, has asked also the European Union to fast-track Ukraine's application for membership.
We address the European Union to admit Ukraine immediately according to the new special procedure. We are grateful to the partners that they stand with us, but our goal is to be with all Europeans and, most importantly, to be equal. I'm sure that's fair. I'm sure we deserved it. I'm sure it is possible.
The UK Ministry of Defence says the bulk of Russia's ground forces are said to be around 18 miles north of the capital. Satellite images taken yesterday show a huge military convoy heading towards Kiev. Now, the United Nations Refugee Agency says more than 500,000 people have now fled Ukraine. The UK have said they are likely to follow in the EU's lead in taking refugees from the country for the next 3 years. Boris Johnson has announced that immediate family members can join Ukrainians currently living in Great Britain. Russia's central bank has raised its key interest rate to an unprecedented 20%. The country's trying to shore up their currency, the ruble, which has fallen now to an all-time low against the dollar following Western sanctions on Moscow. Well, they include the blocking of some Russian banks from the international banking system, SWIFT. You're up to date here on GB News, but on your TV, online and DAB Plus radio. Shortly, we'll be back to the briefing with Gloria.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. With fears that Vladimir Putin is about to intensify his assault on Ukraine's towns and cities with all the potential civilian casualties that may bring. What is life like on the ground? Joining me from Lviv is Maria Tormach, head of the Crimea Platform Department at the mission of the President of Ukraine. Maria, thank you so much for finding the time to join us. Just tell us what life is like on the ground for you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me here. And actually, I can tell you only about Lviv, where I'm now. Lviv is the city in the western part of Ukraine. Actually, war caught me here together with my colleagues. We had some events here, and unfortunately, we did not manage, as of now at least, to go back home to Kyiv. So we're now here, where it's comparatively safe. But still, it's safe here, but you can feel that the war is ongoing in this country everywhere, because Lviv now, it's kind of huge base for military aid and kind of safe haven for dozens and hundreds of IDPs, internally displaced persons in Ukraine, for those people who are seeking for a more safe place. And I should say that the people in Lviv, here in this city, are open the doors of their houses, of their flats, of various institutions here in order to make these people from other parts of country feel safe. So that's the atmosphere here. And of course, many people are terrified by this war, although I have to say that the war is ongoing in Ukraine, and it's like for 8 years as of now, so it's not something that started actually 4 days ago. But of course, it was not so large scale. Currently, we have the war effectively on most of the country, the territory of Ukraine.
How worried are you, your friends, your family that you could have to leave your country?
I'm not going to leave Ukraine. So, with one exception, if all the parts of my country will be occupied by Russia, and that will create a threat for my life, since I'm very openly pro-Ukrainian, pro-European, pro-NATO, and we've been working jointly with my colleagues on the problems with human rights abuses in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine for this previous 8 years. So basically, the Russian occupation will create the threat for my life, direct threat. But otherwise, I will not flee my country. I can tell this for sure. And also, for me, it's a very much personal story, of course, because my sister, she's in Kyiv now, and she decided not to flee from Kyiv, and she's pregnant. And it's awful, believe me, when I wake up and go asleep with my thoughts about my family, which suffers because she's in the basement like day and night, hiding from the shellings and from the rockets from the side of the Russian army.
My goodness. What do you want from the West? What do you want us to do? Are we doing enough?
First of all, I would like to thank, in particular, to Great Britain for this huge support that is provided by the government, by the society as well, by the media, attention from the media. I should say that it's all very important for Ukraine. But of course, the declaration that I signed recently, the Kyiv Declaration, says even about more support that should be provided to Ukraine. And there's 6 points in that declaration saying that we need more weaponry, we need more weapons, we need more safe zones, safe spaces for the civilian population. We need more sanctions against Russian Federation, and particular Putin's allies and Putin himself, in order to make them feel that the war that they are making, it will not go unpunished. And of course, which is very important, I think, is that we need equipment and instruments in order to make effective documenting of the war crimes that are ongoing now in Ukraine. And I should say that Ukrainian civil society, and I was a part of civil society recently. Recently, I shifted just 1 month ago to the governmental work. So we've been working a lot with documenting human rights abuses throughout the 8 years. And we are really experiencing that. But of course, if there's any equipment and any tools that will help us to make it more effective, because now these violations are everywhere and in the large scales, and it's really hard to track them all. So we would appreciate that assistance.
And you mentioned war crimes. Is evidence being collected to justify that claim?
Yes, of course, I'm saying about facts that could amount to war crimes, just to be very precise, of course. And yes, these facts are collected by the joint group of Ukrainian NGOs and governmental institutions. So, and I have to explain that it's really hard because the events are so intense. So many events are on the ground. So many shellings, so many killings, and we know that the numbers of the killed civilians, including children, are quite big. So now we're just dealing, and our colleagues are dealing with collecting the facts that may in future amount to war crimes. But as of now, we can see definitely that there is targeting of civilians, that there are indiscriminative shellings of the civilian objects, of the civilian infrastructure, and people are used as live shields. That is the practice that was used by Russia also in Crimea back in 2014. That is something that we've seen already, and in Donbass as well. So all that in future, of course, we need to collect this information to cross-check it, and that's something that is being done by the government and by NGOs. And after that, it will be, I apologize for the sound, it will be applied and submitted to the international court institutions.
Finally, Maria, how optimistic are you that the talks that are underway today could de-escalate the crisis and could provide some good news for your country?
Of course, I hope. I should say that, of course, it's a political level. It's a high political level. But I think that one of the most important things that has happened in the recent days is that Ukraine started to believe and to support the government, in particular President Zelensky. It's not just because the war started, but because he demonstrated a real leadership. And as for me personally, I trust to the government and to Zelensky. I do understand that he follows the best interest of my country and the people of this country. And of course, we all hope that the war will be stopped. But of course, this should be done not on the cost of the freedom of Ukraine, of our independence, of our democratic values and liberal values. So that's the point. And that's something that Putin will try to contradict.
Maria Tormach, really interesting to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Stay safe. Now, prices were already rising, but the war and the sanctions could send prices in the UK even higher. Here to explain how bad it might get is Liam Halligan, our economics and business editor. Hello, Liam. So sanctions are biting. Tell us about sanctions that the West is imposing on Russia.
Well, this is clearly a military conflict. It's a humanitarian disaster, as we just heard there from Ms. Tormach in a very powerful interview, I thought. But it's also an economic war now, not just between Russia and Ukraine, but between Russia and the West. The West isn't going to put boots on the ground, but we are going to use our economic muscle in order to pressure Vladimir Putin. And that means there is concern about oil and gas from Russia being sanctioned. That's why Putin's been so keen in recent years to diversify to China. He's been building oil and gas pipelines to China for some time. But still, here in Western Europe, oil prices have spiked. They were up at $105 a barrel earlier this morning, Gloria. $70 a barrel only back in December. That's a huge percentage increase, and people feel that on the forecourts when they fill up with petrol and diesel, and also in their utility bills, because gas is used to generate electricity.
What can governments do to protect us against these costs? My husband said yesterday, he said, this is a price worth paying if we have to pay a high price. I said, well, it's easy for us to say, isn't it?
You've put your finger on it, Gloria. It's not, I don't wish to convey that it's all hopeless. Of course it's not. You know, the UK is a very wealthy country. America's a very wealthy country. There is ways of getting gas from America to Europe, not least in so-called LNG ships, that's liquefied natural gas ships without using pipelines. But I do sense, talking to people in government, in the Commons over the weekend, we are now in for a wholesale rethink of Western energy policy, in my view. We're also in for a wholesale rethink of how the government tries to support people ahead of that big energy price spike in April that you and I have been talking about for many weeks. I do think that we are going to see more exploration for oil and gas in the North Sea now. I do think it's possible that even Labour, definitely the Tory party, will swing behind an end to that moratorium on fracking, allowing the extraction of shale gas in fields from Surrey to the northwest of England to Scotland and Northern Ireland. I'm going to be talking about that a lot more in the next hour when I'm doing my On the Money show from 1 till 2. But it strikes me that a lot of the environmental concerns about energy policy are now going to give way to geopolitical and security concerns, given that, as you say, there is a head of steam in UK public opinion. We are prepared to make sacrifices, but those energy price and broader inflation sacrifices are much, much tougher for people at the sharp end, people on lower incomes.
And actually, are we letting energy bosses off the hook here? Because profits are really, really high. Is there enough focus being put on that? Or does this enable them to not confront the fact of their massive, massive profits and blame a global crisis?
I've said for many weeks on my show and in my newspaper columns, I do think Labour's idea of a windfall tax is going to get an awful lot of airtime. I do think it's going to become mainstream politics. I'm not making any judgment on how good or bad a policy that is. It just becomes politically a lot more attractive when you do see the likes of BP and Shell making, multi-billion-pound profits at a time when ordinary folk, particularly in lower income households across that red wall, in seats like the one you used to represent in Nottinghamshire, an ex-mining seat, many people are already struggling with their energy bills. They're going to struggle even more given these high wholesale oil and gas prices as a result of this conflict. And as the West tries to turn the screw with sanctions, closing Russia out of international banking systems like SWIFT.
Oh, just to explain what SWIFT is.
So SWIFT it's an international system that allows banking transactions to be settled between countries. It's vital. If Russia sells oil and gas to Western Europe, we use SWIFT to make sure that Russia gets the money. It's not like you can just, these are multi-billion-pound movements of money. You need a special system to do it. SWIFT is basically dominated by the Western powers. It's based in Belgium. It's broadly controlled by America. If we cut the Russians out of SWIFT, then it's really going to stymie their ability to sell their oil and gas. But there's a danger. The Russians and the Chinese between them are working on their own embryonic international payment system. They could then try and use that across Asia using their collective might. So then the West would lose its monopoly, lose its power to control the international financial system.
Liam Halligan, as ever, thank you. And you'll have lots more on this on your show, On the Money, just straight after hours. Mine, even.
Thank you.
Although you're increasingly becoming part of mine. It's great. That's the case. Thanks, Liam. Now, it's time for my weekly feature where we talk to an MP and their constituent that are working together on a campaign. Emma and Robert Sturdy have been campaigning against their landlord as they want to remove part of their farmland to create acre solar and battery storage proposals. We're going to explain and break all this down. And joining me now is Conservative MP Kevin Hollinrake and his constituents, Emma and Robert Sturdy. Yes, we can see them all. Let's start with Emma and Robert. Just explain why you contacted your MP. Put it in as easy to understand words as you can.
Well, good afternoon first. We had to contact Kevin because we just felt that taking this good farmland out of production for the benefit of solar was the wrong thing to do. We're growing crops here, we're feeding the nation. We simply couldn't just let the energy company run with this. So we approached Kevin for some assistance, and look, we were just seeking some help elsewhere before the energy company just came in and took what they wanted.
What do you mean took what they wanted, Robert? Just
well,
tell us...
they want to take approximately half the farmland, 130 acres and 50 acres from a neighbouring farmer, to turn into a solar farm.
Kevin, how can this happen?
Hi, Gloria. I mean, the big issue here, of course, is everybody believes in renewable energy. Rob and Emma do. We all want to see cleaner energy. But do we do it at the expense of productive farmland? This is a really good farm, been farmed for many years by Rob and Emma and their family. But we're seeing this increasingly around the country. Really good farmland, productive, arable land that could produce food for the nation to eat. Yet, in many cases, and I'm worried about in this particular case, the local authority isn't potentially looking at that food production side of it, they're just looking at energy production. So local authorities are declaring climate emergencies, and we know it is an emergency. But nevertheless, are we taking into account the fact we also need to produce our own food? We used to produce 75% of our own food back in the mid-1980s. Today, it's only 60%. So I think this should be balanced. So solar energy, that's great. But wouldn't it be better on rooftops? Wouldn't it be better on... We build hundreds of thousands of homes every year. Put it on top of there or on unproductive farmland, fine. But not on really good land that Rob and Emma have.
Are the regulations fit for purpose? Is there anything that you could do? You're a member of the governing party. Is there anything that you could do to change the regulations? Are you trying to?
Yes, absolutely. And this is where I've met with the Farming Secretary, George Eustace, and with the Housing Secretary, who's Michael Gove, and said this. I don't think it's sufficiently clear within the national planning policy framework that food production should be considered when we talk about giving planning for solar farms. So that's what we need to change, and I think within that we should set a target for food self-reliance, self-sufficiency. I think the other point about Rob and Emma is they are tenant farmers. The landlord gets a huge uplift in terms of the amount of rent they get from that land if it becomes a solar farm, but Rob and Emma don't get anything like the amount of compensation they should have if they're effectively being kicked off their own farm.
Rob and Emma, from farmers to campaigners. How does that feel? It's not an enviable position. You wouldn't want to have learned how to campaign, but you have.
Yeah, it's not been easy. You know, we haven't chosen to just go down this route. We were pretty much backed into a corner, and so we've had to protect ourselves. It's not been easy. We've come under. Well, the energy company haven't been that great, in their attitude towards us, but we're hopeful that we can sit down and have some positive discussions with our landlord. We haven't yet met with them. We're 17 months into this campaign now. And we're really lucky that we've got loads of support locally. We've got a very good professional team around us and, lots of great family and friends. And that's kept us going, really. And also, I would say that we've also joined up with another 22 campaigners across the country who are also battling solar on good, productive farmland. And so together as a collective, what we're trying to do is work with Kevin and our local MPs and their local MPs to, get these regulations in place so that, energy companies and landlords can't just cause carnage in the countryside and use these loopholes that exist for their own gain, and we have to, as Kevin said, we have to protect the food security and the good farmland, and we also have to protect our livelihood and, Rob's tenancy as well.
Brilliant to talk to you. Thanks so much for explaining all that. Sorry you're going through it, and best of luck in getting a resolution. Rob and Emma, thank you. And just, Kevin, while we have you, just to ask you, there's been some confusion about Liz Truss as the Foreign Secretary, saying that she would absolutely support individual Brits going to fight Russian forces in Ukraine. Defence Secretary, not quite so fulsome when he did the morning round today. What would you say to those people who do want to, those Brits who do want to fight?
Well, I think we need a clear policy on it. I think we need to see some clarity from Number 10, probably to say what would be the policy. It would be unusual. I can see why people would want to help, and I can see why they'd want to help. And I think Ukraine set its own kind of foreign legion to be able to take people who want to come and help, and amazing stuff that's happening in the Ukraine, amazing resilience, and we all want to support that in any way we can. I personally think the best way we can support it is through international sanctions, make those financial sanctions even tougher. What we may well see a run on the banks in Russia, that would be cause tremendous pressure on Vladimir Putin, bring him back to the table, get a peaceful resolution of this situation as soon as possible.
There's going to be a lot of desperate people in Ukraine. Should we take refugees? At the moment, we're saying if you have family members here, then you can, but that's quite harsh, some say.
We should take our fair share, no doubt about it. Absolutely. I mean, there are 44 million people living in the Ukraine. Clearly, we can't take everybody, but anybody who's fleeing persecution, absolutely, those people are bound to go into Europe. I think we should take our fair share.
Kevin, you came on, of course, to bring your constituency issue to life. We're really glad that you came to us with it. You understand that because we're in the middle of such a big story, but we thank you for your for responding to us on the Ukraine too. Always a pleasure to see you, Kevin.
And you, Gloria.
Thank you. Now, later this week, we're going to bring you an interview I recorded last week with Dame Andrea Leadsom, the Conservative MP, former leadership candidate, former cabinet member, former leader of the House of Commons. She expressed her support for motherhood and early years support and for the importance of breastfeeding in particular. But I also asked her about whether babies should be permitted in the House of Commons chamber. Here's what she had to say.
Not so keen, you know. I mean, I think going through the lobby is absolutely fine. But actually, you know, I kind of remember working in a bank. I would not have been taking my babies into the office. And, you know, there's a time and a place. I don't think you just, because you want to support families to be more hands-on, that you should therefore just say, oh, yeah, let's just, you know, start taking babies everywhere we go and let everybody else put up with it. I don't agree with that.
You'll be able to watch that full interview on this programme later in the week. You've been watching The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. I'm back every Monday to Thursday from noon. The show is back Monday to Friday at noon. Up next, it's On the Money with Liam Halligan. But for now, it is time for your weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A wet day for many of us, particularly for Wales, northern and western England, where the rain will be heavy at times. Showers following for parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland in the colder air behind this cold front that's crossing the country at the moment. And ahead of the cold front, East Anglia in the southeast staying largely dry, if rather cloudy, and fairly mild through the rest of Monday. But it's really across central, northern and western England where we've got the rain. Wales as well, and the rain turning heavier and more persistent, particularly across parts of Wales, southwest England, north and northwest England. Scotland, Northern Ireland feeling colder as showers follow, those showers falling as snow above 300 metres. But there will be some brighter spells away from the showers, and the rain doesn't quite reach East Anglia in the southeast until after dark. It then pushes through, and we keep the rain going into the southeast through the night. But it clears elsewhere, clear spells, and with lighter winds, a touch of frost in many northern and western parts of the UK, dipping to around freezing or just below for Scotland, Northern Ireland and northern England, but staying up at 7 or 8 Celsius in the southeast, where it will be a dull and damp start with that rain clinging on right the way through much of the day, really, for the far southeast. It eases elsewhere before another spell of rain moves into parts of Cornwall by the end of the afternoon. Otherwise, plenty of sunshine, North Wales, North Midlands, northwards, and temperatures reaching 8 or 9 Celsius. So a bit colder, but a bit more pleasant with that sunshine replacing the rain for many. Into Tuesday evening, the rain in Cornwall starts to edge north, so affecting much of southwest England and eventually South Wales. And Wednesday's looking like a fairly damp day for the southern 2/3 of the UK, just staying drier and brighter in the far north.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
Right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel.